Okay. Hello, everybody. Um, Although it's titled the Disease Modifying Trial Overview, we'll also spend some time on some of the results that we found with symptomatic trials. As you may know, for the last 4 years, I've been co-authoring, along with some really smart people, a review of Parkinson's disease drug therapies in the clinical trial pipeline. And we've just recently finished the fourth review, which was the 2023 update. You could see my co-authors on there. If you go to the next slide, you could see all their beautiful pictures. And I'm sure a lot of you didn't know that Simon Stott is really a famous international movie star. You could see his picture in the lower right there. So the process we go through this year use strictly clinicaltrials.gov. In previous years, we did try to use other databases from other countries, but we really didn't find enough significant information to improve on the process of going just through clinicaltrials.gov. And basically, what we do is start with the full database of all trials being done for Parkinson's disease. And then we start an exclusion process for those that are non-drug related, device studies, imaging studies, exercise studies, etc. And then we're left with the basis of just clinical trials that are using therapeutics, drug therapeutics. We then try to categorize these into symptomatic therapies and disease-modifying therapies. This is where the fun process starts. We go through a number of iterations. It's sort of like a Delphi process, where we independently review each of the trials and the therapeutics being analyzed, and we decide whether they're symptomatic treatment or disease modifying. In most cases, the information given on clinicaltrials.gov by the research sponsors indicate what they're trying to research, but in many cases they don't. And we have to use information like the trial design, or if the drug was a repurposed drug, what it had been used for previously. And ultimately we get to our final results. And if we move on, we could see I guess we're a little bit out of order here. I was working through email with Rosie to try to get these slides in order. But if you go back to that, that's slide over there. We ended up this year with 139 active clinical trials for Parkinson's drugs. Interestingly enough, going back to the previous conversation about recruitment, these 139 trials require 17,000 participants, people with Parkinson's patients. And to expand on that, just keep in mind that those 17,000 required for recruitment are just those 139 trials, which don't include those trials that are in a waiting phase, completed phase 1, going to phase 2, which are not included, and or completed phase 2, going to phase 3, which are not included, and the whole world of trials involving devices or exercise trials or the many other trials that have not been included in this drug study. So the demand for patients to get involved is really huge. And when Helen adds on her 1,000 patients required for the new MAM study, which is going to make it all that much difficult. So some of the key findings is 45% of the trials involved disease-modifying therapies. 55% of the trials involve symptomatic treatments. And just so we're clear, disease-modifying therapies were defined as those therapeutic drugs which would either slow progression, halt progression, or reverse progression of the disease. So they're drugs that actually interact with the course of the disease, as opposed to symptomatic treatments, which are drugs that would make a symptom better, but would have to be taken ongoing and would have no interaction with the course of the disease. It would rather just treat symptoms that are impacting lifestyle of the participants. Of the trial, 50% of the drugs being researched were in phase 2. The phase 3 trials for disease-modifying therapies actually doubled over the last year, but that doubling really meant it went from 3 to 6 trials. There really still is a lack of movement in the course of research from phase 2 to phase 3, but we're seeing a lot of the phase 2. You can move on, Helen. A lot of the phase 2 trials are coming to a conclusion, so we'll be getting more information. And there are a number of completed phase 2 trials that will be attempting to get into phase 3. We should be getting, if you look at the disease-modifying therapies, they're listed in the top inner circle. And of those, the one that will come up with results soonest is Innova's Therapeutics with Tatanep. And they should be completing sometime in December or January. So hopefully we'll be getting some new information quickly. And I think on the right side, you could see that we cover a whole broad range of therapeutics. So it's one of the good news that we can look at, is that the pipeline is very broad in terms of the types of molecules that are being studied. I think a lot of us are happy that cell therapy is now being included and expanded. Their neurotrophic factors are now being researched. So if we're going to find some type of disease-modifying therapy, the broadest range of research in terms of the molecules being studied will give us the greatest chance of finding something. Next slide. So this will show you the breakdown of the number of trials in each phase and the requirements for enrollment in each phase. And again, as I say, the requirement for target enrollment is really significantly greater if we include the studies that will be starting soon and the host of other types of research being done in Parkinson's disease that really takes a requirement, because once you're in one study, it's very difficult to participate in another trial, particularly in a drug study. if you're in one drug study, you're almost guaranteed to be eliminated from another drug study at that time, and you may be eliminated from future drug studies depending upon the type of research that was being done. Next slide, Helen. So this is an interesting thing. We're back over to symptomatic treatment. If we were to ask a lot of patients in the audience what symptoms impact them the most in terms of their quality of life, most of our research into patient-reported outcomes and patient-reported quality of life shows that non-motor symptoms are really impacting them much more than motor symptoms, whether it be constipation, sleep, anxiety, pain, urinary problems. And I think that's because levodopa has been successful. Other non-dopaminergic symptomatic treatments have been successful in controlling motor symptoms, particularly early stage and mid-stage patients. But if you look at where we are researching right now, you have 22 trials still researching motor symptoms, 15 researching motor and non-motor, with the heavy emphasis in those trials still on non-motor. I guess I would include dyskinesia as a motor symptoms. So the large majority are motor symptom trials, yet the biggest fear that most of us have are future cognitive issues, dementia, etc. And then if you look at the bottom of the list, there's one trial for anxiety, one trial for apathy, one for constipation, one for psychosis, one for sleep. I mean, sleep is, for many of us, at the top of the list. And there's one trial. And I don't know the answer to why this is. My guess is because there's not a lot of money in research for the pharmaceutical companies to spend time and effort with those symptoms. I think the answer I get when I speak to a lot of the people from these companies is that they're already over-the-counter or prescription drugs that treat these symptoms. And I think what the answer would be, or the reply would be from a Parkinson's patient, is that they don't work. Our cause for sleep disorders, particularly if you suffer from RBD like I do, is not the same as somebody that has insomnia for other reasons. So it would be nice to see if we can get some more money and time spent on non-motor symptoms.
Eric, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Which I suppose is probably, again, a regulatory question. Is there a need to define carefully Parkinson's sleep concerns, Parkinson's psychosis, Parkinson's constipation, so that it actually becomes recognized as a core symptom? Because if that's one of the barriers for people getting involved in, or the trials actually happening, because the regulators won't let them move ahead because it's not recognized as a real thing. Is there value in just really honing down on what is going on in these absolute symptoms within Parkinson's?
And I think that's a great idea. With the research in psychosis, as an example, it has been defined as Parkinson's psychosis, but I haven't seen any research that identifies Parkinson's sleep disorder. I mean, we know that RBD is something very specific to neurological disease. And I sort of find it shocking that it's so forgotten about in the research community. And we know that even with the new assay to identify, diagnosis of Parkinson's, that the early symptoms are sleep disorder, loss of smell, constipation. It's such a common trait among early diagnosis of patients. Hopefully, there's a trend that we've seen from some of the early years that this will continue, as more than 30% of newly registered drugs trials have been focusing on non-motor symptoms. I don't know if this is a trend or not. It remains to be seen. And what we would like to do with the 2024 review, which would be number 5, is spend more time looking at drug-related trends in clinical trials and see if we can identify anything. Because we got to keep in mind that the paper that is reported and the results that have been reported really are a snapshot of one day, the last day of January of each year. And it doesn't really give enough information about what trends are taking place. And it would be nice if we can see some trends. Is there a trend to more non-drug related, motor related trials? Is there a trend to more disease modifying trials? Is there a trend to disease modifying trials that are looking for prodromal patients? And again, when we discuss how many patients are needed for these trials, just remember how many of these trials require early stage patients. You know, these trials based upon the old clinical diagnostic diagnosis and staging, and with new trials will probably be using more biological staging. But in either case, it knocks out the large majority of the Parkinson's patients community from participating. I mean, I've been looking for years to find a new disease modifying trial to enroll in, and I don't qualify for most of them for exclusionary reasons. The primary one being they use years from diagnosis as an exclusionary criteria, and I don't qualify. So it's just another reasoning why recruitment for these trials, as previously stated, is so difficult, beyond the logistics of getting into a trial and the years required to participate. So I think one of the good things, and actually it goes back to something I said yesterday at the end of the staging presentation, is we're seeing a new era of collaboration and expansion of clinical design. EJS Act is a collaborative effort that Helen just spoke about, and it'll include the MAMS research that is extremely exciting. It's a whole new method of clinical trial design. It has been used successfully for other diseases, And certainly waiting to see how that one proceeds. Path to Prevention, PTP, is a collaborative effort of federal agencies and Parkinson's community and researchers to, again, find biomarkers and sort of speed up the concept of trial design. So that's one of the big positives that we could all look to, is the collaborative effort focused on speeding up clinical trial process. It's probably one of the most frustrating parts of my advocacy, is just how long and how timely it is to go through the process. And, we all know it. That's true with most clinical research for most disease, but it doesn't stop it from being frustrating. And again, Simon will appreciate giving out autographs at the end of the conference.
Can you just leave that up there? Because actually I need to take a photograph of that and send it to Simon. Thank you. Partly because I think that would definitely amuse him. Gary, thank you very, very much indeed. This pipeline paper is such an important resource, and for so many people who are researching in Parkinson's and working in drug development, we see the donut that has been in this paper with all the trials on it, the symptomatic below, the disease modifying at the top. We see it in pretty nearly every conference, pretty nearly every time it's being quoted. So the work that goes into this is so worthwhile, because it is informing, everybody's using consistent information to inform their thinking, and it's putting information in the public domain in an aggregated way, which means that people are aware of what drugs are being studied and for what reason. And what stage they're at. So I think it's a hugely important resource. And Gary, yours and Kevin's involvement in that and driving it forward, and with Sue, it's just extraordinary. So here goes for 2024, but thank you for everything that you do with it.
Thank you. My co-authors did most of the heavy lifting. I just get the fun job of presenting it.
I don't think that's quite true, actually. Having listened in on a number of those calls, the wise words that come across the pond on Zoom are very, very important for that effort. But thank you.
So if we just Googled that, we could get a copy of it, or?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
So Rosie, if you could bring back up on the screen the previous slide. Is that possible?
Yeah.
There's a QR code, so actually if you point your camera at that, that should take you straight through to the right page, and you should be able to download it from our website. You try and pick up that QR code. Or the picture of Brad Pitt. as whatever suits, really. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Gary. Feel
Have a great
better,
time.
please. Yeah, look after yourself and speak soon.